Welcome to Evidence and Instinct, where women practitioners explore women's health through the lens of Eastern medicine and evidence-based insight. Grab a cup of tea or head out for your walk and join us for a thoughtful discussion grounded in evidence and instinct. Welcome to another episode. My name's Leigh Erickson. I am here with Eartha, Courtney, and Anne of Mulberry Acupuncture, based in Longmont, Colorado. We are here to have a conversation about women's health, instinct, and traditional medicine.
Leigh, how are you doing? You're like on your way to probably by the time this is out, due date will be passed and hopefully baby will be on its way.
Yeah, let's hope this one decides to come out on time. So my due date is 8 days away, which is so wild. Time is just flying by. I'm doing good though. I feel like I'm in a really great just headspace overall. And it's definitely easy to get wrapped up in the what ifs and all of the things that could happen, but I'm just trying to stay focused and keep the vision and stay grounded, and even in these wild times that we're experiencing in the collective. But yeah, again, so fortunate to have you guys as the support team and feeling good. So now just kind of in the weird time zone of waiting for things to happen and unfold however they want to. So
exciting. Yeah, I just started lifting weights, which has been a new thing. I've always been pretty physically active. I've been pretty consistent with Pilates and yoga and walking and those kind of things, but never focused on strength training and never really have gotten myself comfortable in a gym. And so I have been working with a wonderful personal trainer that's like getting me all settled in and making sure that my form is safe and good. And yeah, I benched 55 pounds yesterday.
Dang. Are you sore?
No, I'm not sore at all.
Nice.
Yeah, she's really good about like keeping it to the right amount so that you don't have a lot of extra, hardcore recovery to do, but I feel stronger. Yeah, it's such an exciting thing to add in with this navigating perimenopause and trying to support bones and things like that as I'm starting to get a little bit older. And yeah, it's good. How about you, Anne? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I just love what you both have shared. Last night I went to see a folk singer in Denver at Swallow Hill with a couple of girlfriends. And I do think that's also on topic with the podcast we're going to discuss today, because they talk about how important it is to have community and to have connection, and how important that is for health span and longevity and quality of life. It's the sort of thing that just feels really good in your soul, or your heart is just so happy, to have a nice dinner with a couple of girlfriends and then walk over and listen to a wonderful folk singer that's one of my friend's favorites from way, way back. And, she brings so much love to her music that you just walk out of there glowing, and so feeling that kind of connection and community is lovely.
Awesome.
What's new with you, Courtney?
I think that's really awesome. I'm seeing a lot of lovely fertility patients right now, a lot of which are going through IVF, and then also seeing some patients that are going through perimenopause and who I think are very empowered by this content and content that they're consuming, and specifically from the women that we listen to in preparation for this podcast, Stacey Sims and Mary Claire Haver, and they're just coming in all pumped up and having sometimes already met with a practitioner about hormones and feeling heard and feeling validated by the content they're consuming, by the practitioners they're visiting, and just feeling really prepared for this next stage of life, for this perimenopausal stage. So it's been really exciting at work. I mean, that really pumps me up that women are feeling that way.
So awesome. That must be so satisfying to see the results like that. Yeah. And staying with a client for that long and just seeing them from the start to the kind of finished.
Yeah. So Courtney has alluded to. Back in October, we all were sharing this podcast back and forth and super excited about it. The podcast that we're all talking about, what is the Diary of a CEO? And he did a 2-part series on women's health with 4 experts in the field, and they discussed in detail some of the things that they deal with in their own practices and women going through women's health all the way from, being a teenager and just getting your period for the first time all the way through to menopause and what challenges they face. We were hoping to comment on that today and add to the conversation and allow for a conversation between the 4 of us as well. And follow through with some of the takeaways and the aspects of that discussion that felt like hit home to us, but also maybe we have a different perspective on. And so I was hoping that, Anne, you could start us off with the piece that really stood out to you. It also stood out to me, and I would love to start the conversation around that because I think it relates to everything else, basically. And so go ahead, Anne.
Yeah, sure. So listening to the Diary of a CEO, the topic of what natural is came up. And the 4 doctors and Stephen were discussing this within the context of assisted reproductive technologies, specifically about freezing eggs and women's values. But as an acupuncturist, I see this all the time, whether it's about fertility or not. A lot of our clients come to see us because they value natural medicine. They value being natural, living a natural life. And some of that obviously is the bias of the type of medicine that we practice and who we see. But I think that it's really important to look at what's underneath that. What are the values underneath this idea of natural and natural medicine and natural healing? What is it essentially? And it can be different for different people. And what I see commonly, and obviously everybody's different, but what I see commonly is underneath that a desire to have the least amount of medical intervention possible. So conservative treatment, essentially. So fewer pharmaceuticals, fewer surgical procedures, fewer medical procedures overall. The less is more, and the idea of taking an active role in one's own health through diet, lifestyle, etc. And so Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and Chinese herbs are very well positioned to work with folks across a number of different health concerns who value natural health, natural medicine. Because what Chinese medicine does is it helps to stimulate the body's natural capacity to heal, right? Our needles, as I mentioned this to so many clients, our needles are not dipped in a magical potion. There's nothing special. They're stainless steel. They're single-use, sterile, obviously. But what they're doing is they're stimulating the body to change. So the change that is evoked through acupuncture is coming from that person. We're not putting it in the system. And so that's about as natural as it gets, right? We're supporting the body's ability to do its job to its best possible capacity. And for some people, that's enough, right? That's enough to get the health outcomes that they want. That's enough to get them towards their health goal. For others, it's not. Sometimes we got to work as a team. Sometimes what we can do is get them 70% of the way, 80% of the way, but we need to work as a team with other providers to get them to their ultimate goal. But I do think it's important to talk about that, especially as Dr. Stacy Sims mentioned, within the context of the socio-cultural bias that comes with women's health, that comes with women in general, women in medicine. As Dr. Vonda had mentioned, with orthopedics, the latest and greatest technology is lauded, right? It's sought after. It's respected. But the latest and greatest technology in terms of women's reproductive health is something that a lot of people avoid, right? And so getting into that and understanding why, and as Stephen mentions in there, when it comes to reproduction and conception, this preference for natural conception is great, but then, he juxtaposes that with nothing else in our life is natural, right? Like we're driving in cars, we're flying on airplanes. There's so much in our life that's not natural. Why are we placing this extra pressure on women?
In Courtney and my world, it's like so amazing what they can do, right? But I think that there's a missing part to that. There's not the emphasis on actually naturally healing the body before that procedure happens. And so a lot of times I think IVF fails just for that reason. You know, people go in with high A1C, inflammatory conditions, and all kinds of things that can be healed in the body if given time before going through that procedure. And so it's always frustrating to me that it's not a both in that world. I know that sometimes there are times when that intervention needs to happen to make fertility move forward, but it's not always thought about. It's an afterthought. I'm working with a couple right now, and the male partner was a smoker. He was doing kratom, he was smoking marijuana, and they retrieved an egg and tried to do a transfer, and it failed. And it's like we've taken the last 4 months to get all of that addiction out of his body and start to heal the cellular aspect of his body so that his sperm is healthier. And I believe we haven't gotten there yet, but I believe that it's going to have a better outcome in the end. And so I think, yeah, the same with injuries and orthopedics and things like that. You know, last winter I had a client come in with basically tennis elbow, and she had seen an orthopedic surgeon, and he said the only answer is surgery. I think we did 6 treatments and she was fine. Like it was just a matter of increasing circulation around that tendon attachment and allowing the body to respond and heal itself. And you know, I understand that a surgeon's tools are surgery. They don't have the tools outside of that, but it's like also not offered. First, go try these things, then come back to me if it doesn't. I think that especially in the fertility world, it's not recognized nearly enough. They just take you where you're at and let's get that transfer done because we got to get on to the next, you know, and there's not a lot of prep. There's not a lot of talking about the fact that an egg takes 100 days to develop. And so whatever you were up to 100 days ago, 3 months ago, is still affecting your egg quality and your sperm quality. And so it's a process. It's a longer process than they like to allow, and they push people through really fast.
Yeah, I feel like overall, even beyond health, like we are just so entrenched in this immediate results mentality where we just want, you know, the magic pill or the surgery or whatever to just have this fast, strong, immediate results. We've gotten so far away from that. So it's important that you're mentioning that. It's interesting. And yeah, and the pressure of women, especially even just like women's due dates are really interesting too. Like when they are actually pregnant and like the pressure of showing up to that actual due date and being on time for that and not just trusting their body enough. Obviously, I'm literally in that window right now. And so again, like I was mentioning earlier, just really trying to be at ease with everything. But I just feel like, yeah, the more pressure that the external sources tend to put on you, it almost maybe prolongs things from happening because you're expected to show up at this certain time, you know. It's just interesting. So there's just like layers of the immediate, like the deadlines and like the immediate results that we've just been so entrenched in and in our way of thinking of health.
I think it's so true. I mean, even with our periods, right? We're just like expected to just show up all the time, even if we're not feeling good.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of outside push to just ignore our own bodies.
I think that the sociocultural piece that Anne was alluding to me, I think that for women, you know, women are prioritizing careers now. They're waiting longer to have children. They're waiting longer to find a partner. And so then that leads to often having to seek some intervention, whether it's earlier to prepare for that scenario, or if it's all at that time when they meet their partner and they're 40 years old. And I think with that, even though that was for a long time, that was their life goal, was to have a career, now they want to have a baby. And I think that there's a lot of guilt. Sometimes women carry a lot of guilt about, what did I do? Did I make a mistake? Did I wait too long? Did I not prioritize my life in the right way? Because of course, this also sometimes coincides with midlife, where we're already, looking back, having a lot of thoughts, introspection, possibly regrets about how we've lived the last 20 years. And so there's all this pressure. There's the pressure of time. There's the pressure of aging, which, our society puts a lot of pressure on that. Then there's, this just feeling like this was all in their control. And so I think, again, with that comes the guilt, and then having to seek the unnatural intervention just adds to that, when this, like everyone's been saying, this is, a beautiful, amazing technology that we have. And so I think there's just a lot of conflict that goes along with having to seek out IVF and not being able to kind of have it all, I guess, like have the career and be able to conceive naturally and do it all in a certain timeline. So
Yeah, I'll just chime in on that. I absolutely agree. And I feel like it touches on what we discussed in our first episode also, which is the double standards that women face, right? Like, have a successful career, do this, do that, and do it all with one hand tied behind your back, right? Be able to conceive, but do it without any help, right? Like, look beautiful and never age, but don't actually do anything to ensure that, it's like, it's crazy is really what it is. And so I think that is also what was in my mind when that came up. Is, I mean, doing things naturally is a really important value and priority and lifestyle to respect. But I also think it's important to scratch the surface, like you're saying, Courtney, and like, what does that mean, right? And is that actually holding somebody back, or is it adding a layer of judgment or guilt or shame on top of it? If you want to have a successful career, if you also want to have a family, if that means utilizing more tools in your tool belt to do that, like, there shouldn't be shame or judgment around that, Like, contrasting example from Diary of a CEO was about virility in men and anti-aging in women, right? Like, for women, anti-aging is the superficial thing of just trying to stay pretty longer, right? Whereas for men, it's about being virile and so on. And nobody questions a guy who goes in and gets a testosterone prescription so that he can still be strong and virile into his, gray hair years. Whereas for women, that's like a big shame inducing thing. And there's so much stigma and taboo around that. And why, right? Like, we have to do it all, but we have to do it with one hand tied behind our backs,
it's only natural that our ovarian reserve starts to decline. I mean, that's what they also mentioned too. I mean, all of this whole process, right, as everyone's saying, is only natural. It's okay to also still want to have another child at that time, but of course, some other type of intervention, whether it be, a combination of IVF and acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, I think when women go to IVF clinics, they get told all of this terrible information, or at least the way that it's expressed to them is in this terrible way. Like, oh, your ovarian reserve is low, your AMH is low, all of these things. But if a woman is in her 40s, like, that is only natural. So
That's normal.
It's not something to be ashamed of. And it's not something, it's just, it tells you where we're at. And okay, we're going to work from there.
Agreed.
We could talk about aging in that, this is when women start to not feel like themselves, or, I probably less so about fertility and more about perimenopause. Is that like, is my thyroid off X, Y, and Z? And so then they're, sometimes ordering blood work on their own, right? Or sometimes, starting to wear wearables and look at their HRV every day and see what their sleep was like. And then they're trying to interpret that separately from what's going on in their body, like with what Stacey Sims talks about, how she says, dependent on where you are in your cycle, your HRV is going to be lower, but that does not mean you're not stress resilient. It's just like taking it out of context. And so sometimes completely leaving that data for an individual to interpret on their own actually causes extra stress.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I feel like sometimes when I more so obsess over something, it almost makes me causes more stress, and it almost adds to the problem even more. The wearables world is really interesting to me. I know, Eartha, you have experience with
Yeah, I was
as
gonna
well.
say the way that they explained it in that podcast, which was an aha moment for me for sure, is that the wearables are based on a male's like data. And so with women's cycles, we have different capacity for stress in our bodies and different amounts of inflammation and different amounts of stamina and resilience that happens. And you feel it as you go through your cycle, right? It's not the same every single day. And for men, they often have this very even pattern. If they get sick or they have extra stress in their lives, maybe it does go up and down a bit, but it's not this cyclical thing that we go through. And the wearables are not calibrated to that cycle. And so when we're in that like luteal phase where we have more inflammation in our bodies and we don't have the stamina and things like that, the wearables are saying that we cannot handle stress. And in reality, we're set up for handling stress and we can get through that. We do it all the time. We see it, we
Power through.
recover, we still work out, we still, it's not like life stops when we're in our luteal phase.
Mhm.
And so I think the point that was being made is that we're looking at data that doesn't actually apply, and then we're basing our lives off of that data. Like even in the last year, I've been wearing a CGM on and off, paying attention to blood sugar, which I'm realizing with hormones changing, blood sugar is a little bit more hard to manage. And it's been a really cool tool to like hone in on and start to figure out new things that I need in my diet and exercise and the weight training and all of that. And definitely luteal phase. There's nothing I can do with blood sugar. It's always much higher than I want it to be. And it makes me wonder if I'm putting it into my mind that I'm doing something wrong. But in reality, my natural body is keeping blood sugar levels a little higher going into period time, which is probably an evolutionary process that needs to happen in the body. And it's not healthy to starve yourself right before period or over exercise yourself right before period when you should be building up for this event that has to happen every month where it's depleting, right? And so that was a big aha moment for me as well in that podcast of like, whoa, we're working off of this data that's based on a male's body and there's no why. We're 51% of the population. Why are they not coming out with two different things? Like this is a female one, this is a male one. Or why are they not having settings on there that like allow us to track our cycles within let the wearable know where we are in our cycle so that it can adjust that data to make it feel like you're in a normal state, because it messes with your head. And so many people are relying on that, and it is causing its own health effect with women, I think. And I think especially when you're going through perimenopause and your body's changing and weight changes and all of that, it's especially you're vulnerable. It's a very vulnerable time. It's not like when you're in your 20s and you put on 5 pounds and the next week you take it off. It's like you have a change in your body where it's something that you have to be aware of it for sure, but it's also just a natural part of life. It is making yourself feel like it's not it's it's not good.
Not at all. Unbelievable. I
Yeah.
mean, I can't, yeah. The fact that they're all built on the 24-hour male hormone
Yeah.
cycle is just
Testosterone,
yeah. So sounds like somebody needs to, out there in the tech world, really needs to come up with a female specific wearable. Like, how does that not exist right now? That's
I don't
insane to
know.
me.
I don't understand it. Yeah. I think,
Unbelievable.
well, probably because a lot of the wearables were set up for athletes, right? Male athletes to be able to just figure out how to train properly. And then female athletes that are at that level tend to not cycle because they're working their
They
body
just
so
work.
hard. So they're
Yeah.
like, yeah. And so, but then the general public doesn't know that or relate to it that way.
I think that that's one of the things. Yeah, I really appreciate you making that point, Eartha. And I feel like having that information can be so helpful for women. You shouldn't have to spend hundreds of dollars on a wearable and then interpret your own data on the side, because the interpretation or the calculation and the algorithm built in is not accurate, right? Like, what are you paying for? Given that and knowing that, it's helpful once a woman knows that to be able to interpret her own data, right? So, like, I have a wearable watch. It measures my HRV. It measures all these different things, and it's so important to be able to contrast the data that you're getting from it versus your lived experience. And your lived experience should always win, right? So if I look at my data and it says I slept like trash last night, but I thought I actually slept pretty well, that tells me a few different things. One, I know I can see that stress score is really high. My HRV is really impacting that. And I can look back to when I was wearing a CGM as well and know that if I ate too large of a meal, too close to bed, if I didn't go for my after dinner walk, if I'm going to bed with higher blood sugar, that's going to impact that stress score, that recovery score, that HRV score. I know that now, right? Same with if I'm fighting a cold, show that my sleep was trash, that I was stressed all night long. And it's my immune system fighting a cold. And I know that last year when I had COVID, it was red. The whole night long was red, right? And I can also see that once again, right before my period starts, if I'm not exhibiting other symptoms that I expect before my period begins, then I know when my lived experience is different than what my data is showing, that it means I'm probably going to get my period in a couple of days. It says I'm under recovered. It says I slept terribly, but I feel actually kind of good. Then I know, oh yeah, well, it's day 25.
Can you explain HRV again for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah, so HRV stands for heart rate variability. And it's essentially these micro changes in your heartbeat from one beat to the next. And it's counterintuitive. So if you have a low HRV score, that means that there is low variability between one heartbeat and the next. And on the surface, that sounds like that's the desirable outcome, but it's actually the inverse. You want a really high HRV, and that indicates a more parasympathetic or relaxed state. So when you're stressed, that shows up we all know this, right? When you're stressed, every single system in your body is impacted. Your immune system is impacted. Your sensory processing is impacted. Your digestion is impacted. The way that you breathe is impacted. And the way that your heart beats is impacted when you're stressed. And so that's what that measures essentially, are these micro changes from one beat to the next. And so it's like biofeedback, right? So you look at your HRV score in real time. There are a number of different devices that do that. A lot of these wearables do it as well because they're measuring your heart rate, and so they can do that extra calculation. And so in real time, even if you're sitting at your desk, like right now, if we were to all look at our HRV scores, we're not out running, but based on how either nervous we are about being on camera or how excited we are about the topic we're talking about, our HRV score is going to change. If I were sitting here listening to a meditation, my HRV score is going to be different than when I'm here on camera, right? Even though physically nothing has changed, right?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Anne and Courtney and I all first started wearing a CGM. We were just like, what is going on? Why? What? We're not, what's going on? And now I just kind of know that I don't wear a CGM that part of my cycle, or I just don't pay as close of attention to it. And so, and that's been my adjustment. And I just stick to the things that I know work in the first part of my cycle. And, yeah, and it keeps things pretty level after period starts. It's interesting to see the stark difference. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's something that definitely needs work right now in the tech world.
Well, it's like, the tech world is, predominantly dominated by
Males.
tech
Yeah.
bros. Yep. So if any women are listening in the tech world, you could probably make a lot with this creation, this invention. It's
Yeah.
definitely a high demand.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody's got something that they're wearing these days. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's interesting.
I think that along these lines of interpreting our own data or interpreting data in general also brings up another topic that impacted me in the podcast, which was when Mary Claire Haver said that normal in blood work means common, not non-pathological. And as our culture or society gets more and more sick, that common, that normal level moves. And so I think a lot of times, women go to the doctor and they tell them all their blood work is normal, and yet they're experiencing all of these symptoms when maybe if someone with a more functional medical background looks at it, they say, actually, this isn't really in an ideal range, and this is, what I can offer you. So I thought that was interesting too.
Absolutely agree. I'm always telling clients this. I'm always asking for lab results because they'll come in and say, "Oh yeah, my thyroid is normal." And it's like, "Yeah, but maybe it's normal, but is it functional?" We like functional medicine looks at things in a very different way than the vitamin D, for example. The range is 20 to 100 is normal. And functional medicine likes to see it, between 70 and 90 is more of a functional level in the body. And it does cause symptoms and it does cause cellular damage. And so it's definitely something that is important to be aware of. And I really liked how she described it. I felt like it gave me a fuller understanding of what normal is. It's based on the average population, which is crazy because it's like I don't know how many people are pre-diabetic or have type 2 diabetes that are in that population of normal, and that is all cellular damage. That's all metabolic dysfunction that affects so many labs. And it's crazy that our data is being based off of normal instead of functional, and doctors don't have their heads wrapped around it in that way. I think that that's also another thing that's starting to come around. I have had clients come in recently with ferritin levels that were, on the lower end of normal, and their doctors were taking action, which is encouraging.
So sad. We've just set the set the bar so low,
Yeah.
and even just down to the vitamin D thing. It's like the majority of us are sitting inside working on, we're indoors all the time, working on computers or whatever. So it's like we're all, this baseline of a lack of vitamin D in general. Oh yeah, that's fine. We're all doing it. We're all just not getting enough sunlight. So it's normal. Yeah, it's so sad.
Well, if we really want to actually have preventative medicine, if that's
Right.
really the goal going forward, and I think even for doctors now, for doctors, insurance companies, it's all about preventative medicine going forward, then we need to look at blood work differently, not just when someone is already sick. So, or even when someone's already in the pre-diabetic, stage, it's like we need to look at those numbers creeping up and have intervention much earlier.
Like Mark Hyman always says, arthritis starts 10 to 15 years before you have arthritic symptoms. Dementia starts 20 to 20 years before you show that you have dementia. And so much of how medicine is practiced right now is a reaction to what the client is bringing in, rather than that preventative thought of like, how can we support the body so that it doesn't even have to go there, so that we don't have to try to reverse this thing that's super hard to reverse because it is pretty severe damage in the body. And it's an interesting thing that needs to evolve for sure.
I'd like to propose changing the terminology, especially based on that portion of the podcast and that really eye-opening observation about normal labs. I think that they should be reframed as common, because normal means that you're okay and you're healthy. That's the inference there, right? Oh, well, my cholesterol's normal, I'm fine. And really, I think the language needs to change is your cholesterol is common. Because your cholesterol may be with common range, but you're still presenting X, Y, and Z symptoms. Or, to your example earlier about thyroid, I feel like the thyroid reference range is about a mile wide. So many people have quote unquote subclinical thyroid disorders, and it's not that they're subclinical, they're presenting with clear symptoms, but their numbers, their labs are within the normal range. So it's within this common range that's a mile wide. And they're over here technically within range, but that's not good for them. That's not normal for them. That's not healthy for them, right? But it's common. So I don't know. Maybe that'll be my new mantra moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that it's just another avenue for patients to get gaslit. It's like people go in with very clear thyroid issues and they come back with, a 3.8. This just happened to me the other day, 3.8. And the doctor is like, you're fine, we're not doing anything about it. And she is struggling so much, and it's like, that's not I should clarify, it's TSH.
I was going to say, yeah, for those of us who don't know what that means. And so TSH is what exactly?
It's the thyroid stimulating hormone, which comes from the brain, and it stimulates the thyroid to produce the thyroid hormones. And when it's really high, it's a sign that the system is working really hard. And so you want that on the lower side.
And so out of a scale of 1 to 5 or 10?
So Western medicine looks at it as 1 to 4 is normal. And functional medicine often looks at 1 to 2 is normal.
Interesting.
And if it's slightly below 1, that you're still in that normal range. But it depends on, I think it depends heavily on what you're feeling in your body. Because there are some people that run a little bit higher than that, 2.5, and they don't have symptoms, and their body is making up for the difference in their own way. But I think that it should go off of how the client is feeling. And I think the same thing with ferritin levels and iron and those kind of things. It's like, if there's symptoms of strong fatigue, let's increase it. It's not, it's not going to hurt to treat it. It's interesting to me that it's often dismissed, and I feel instead of like, oh, you're really not feeling good, let's see what we can do. And these are in normal range for the population, but maybe your range is this, and so it needs to be recognized a bit better.
I think it also depends on your health goals too. I mean, when you're trying to conceive, we're looking for very specific levels, right? It can't just be common. Like it needs to be, your vitamin D needs to be between 70 and 90. Your TSH needs to fall within that 1 to 2 range or very closely outside of it. So again, I think health goals need to be taken in consideration.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just really quick, I'm just curious, like while we're talking about data and everything, and while doctors are like looking at what range is common and everything, is that based off of location, like geographical location? Is that based off of for the United States, or like as the world at large? Like, how do they measure all of this data? I'm just curious.
My understanding is that it's the lab that comes up with the bell curve, right? Like based on where most of their population that they're testing falls is the normal.
Okay.
So yeah, it probably depends on how big the lab is and if they're national
whatever their results are that they've tested for. Gotcha. So
because
interesting.
each lab company has their own ranges, which makes it interesting too.
Yeah. Gotta wonder how much that can throw something off.
I think that this podcast also did a really good job of pulling out some of the conditions that women experience in their reproductive years and are dismissed or not treated well or just not emphasized in the research and things like that. And two of those that are like near and dear to my heart are PCOS and endometriosis. I feel like I'm on a crusade to make sure that women are empowered and know what those conditions are and have resources and are totally something that gets, again, dismissed in women's health. And this podcast in particular did a good job of, I think, talking about PCOS and endometriosis and giving it light and giving it understanding. So I think PCOS, just to explain what it is polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it's a condition that happens when you're developing in the womb, actually. And there's something that happens to the ovaries that signal for it to produce more eggs than it should be. And so when you go through adolescence and into menarche, your first period, it starts to signal the wrong amount of hormones in the body, which then confuses the body. And so a lot of times people will have really long cycles or irregular cycles. And that's one of the symptoms of PCOS. It also has a strong correlation to metabolic disease, so insulin resistance and hormone imbalance in general. So a little bit higher testosterone levels. Yeah. And it's one of those things that when you go to a doctor and they actually diagnose it, their treatment is giving you birth control and not actually addressing any of the underlying conditions that can help manage it. And I think we're really good at that. I know that I have seen huge transformations with supporting people with PCOS and getting cycles regulated and getting fertility supported and the metabolic piece addressed and inflammation.
Yeah, just speaking from clinical experience, it's been really nice, Eartha, that you and I have been able to bring our heads together over some PCOS cases that we've worked on. And because you have such a wonderful and strong functional medicine background, it's a really great complement to the Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and herbs that we provide in the office. And so I feel like our clients get that extra benefit, especially with more complex gynecological conditions like PCOS and endometriosis. But I do feel like the combination of your functional medicine background, Eartha, and the Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and herbs that we all bring to the table is an extra layer of care that we can provide patients with complex gynecological conditions like PCOS and endometriosis that they can't find elsewhere. And especially if they're not getting the answers that they want with their other providers. And to your point, if the typical or the common recommendation with PCOS is to take an oral contraceptive pill, that can help regulate cycles. But if that's not treating the underlying condition, if that's not helping the patient get towards their health goals, if that's not the way in which they want to get there, then I agree. We've got a lot of resources that we can provide, and I'm really impressed with the outcomes that we can have, quite honestly. And I really think that your background in particular, Eartha, is a huge part of that, because we can combine both the interpretation of the lab results and understanding the metabolic component that so many women have with the desire to have more regular cycles, with the desire to eliminate whatever unwanted symptoms are coming with the PCOS. And if fertility is a goal, help them get there. And that's I think that that's something not a lot of people realize is an opportunity or an option out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel bad. There's probably so many women who probably have to choose between suffering and treating this, or having kids. But the beauty of, like you just said, that's amazing that you can be able to treat and have both things. And the other thing with birth control is I feel like it just brings up so many other side effects that you're then trying to react to. So I'm sure you have tons to say about that.
I totally agree. I think, the treatment of using oral contraceptives is actually covering up the symptoms, and the symptoms are there to warn you that the body is not functioning properly. And so taking something that makes you ignore those symptoms and not actually getting to the root of why that's happening has long-term repercussions for later in life. And a lot of times, people will come off of the oral contraceptives and experience way worse symptoms because it hasn't been addressed from the very beginning. And so, yeah, that's definitely a repercussion of that. And then if you're trying to get pregnant, that's not the way that we can manage that disease. You have to get to the bottom of it. You have to heal the ovaries, and you have to heal the metabolic disease. And there's a lot of inflammation that comes with that, and hormone regulation that comes with that has to be addressed.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up about how with the, metabolic syndrome, with insulin resistance, with that creating oxidative stress, and that lowering egg quality, preventing implantation, not only with the disruption of ovulation.
Yeah, absolutely. It does affect fertility. I think
Okay.
that's a good awareness around why people have fertility issues, and it's often ignored. Even 2 weeks ago, I started working with a fertility client that self-diagnosed PCOS just based on her symptoms. And I would totally agree because of the list of symptoms that she had, that she had facial hair, she had long cycles, she had cystic acne, it was like a hard time with managing weight. I do believe she was wearing a CGM wearable and glucose was an issue. And she actually went to 3 doctors in the last year because she's been trying to conceive, and nobody presented anything to her to help her with her fertility other than putting her on a contraceptive pill, which is like the opposite of what she needs for her fertility. And she's like, I don't want to get on a pill and then it's going to make my hormones even worse. Like, why can't I get to the bottom of this? And a huge part of my conversation with her was actually empowering her around that and like saying, yes, you are picking up on the things that you know in your body, and you are, like, it's true that you probably need to find a different OB that actually has some knowledge about PCOS, and, talked about the tools that we can work on together to move forward. And you could see that it was like such a relief to be talking to somebody that believed her, But yeah, I think to your point, Courtney, it does affect fertility in a big way.
Right. I mean, I think that another issue is that, with the metabolic syndrome being the root cause of PCOS, so likely sometimes, especially when these women are going through IVF, they have a high yield, right? They have a high AMH, so they have a lot of follicles. And so sometimes their retrieval yields a lot of eggs, but then what's the quality of these eggs, right? So it's all about quantity, or it's all about rather quality over quantity. And so even then, let's say they're able to retrieve, a certain number of eggs that yield a certain number of euploid embryos, then we have to make sure that these embryos implant. And if there's metabolic issues going on creating oxidative stress, even if we've been able to get some healthy embryos, we have to make sure those embryos can implant. And if there's oxidative stress going on, there might be an issue with implantation. So it's if that's not being treated, it might disrupt the process.
So common.
Right. It might disrupt the process at some point, maybe not at the retrieval, maybe not in the first stage, but in the later stage. So, or this woman develops gestational diabetes. So it's just, no matter what, it's going to reveal itself at some point.
Yeah. And actually you can do a lot in your lifestyle and a lot in your with acupuncture and with Chinese herbs and with supplements and all of that, and it does make a huge difference. I have seen it over and over and over again, and to be able to empower women to actually have those tools and be able to make that transition into a healthier body, it's amazing. It's so cool. Yeah. The other part of that or that podcast that was really interesting, and I felt so grateful that it was brought up in their conversation, is endometriosis. Endometriosis is one of those diseases that I've heard as many as 1 in 7 women have. Like, it's insane how common it is. And it takes on average 10 years for a person to get diagnosed. And through that 10 years, they're going to practitioners that are denying that they have something going on in their bodies. And it doesn't just show up as painful periods. And that is the main symptom that practitioners are relying on for diagnosis. And right now, currently, I'm working with somebody that has severe GERD, and it's a symptom of endometriosis. They often will cause painful periods, but it's not the only symptom that goes with it. Yeah, it can show up as digestive, as IBS. Courtney and I had a client last year that could not stop vomiting as she would get closer to her period. And it took the two of us to investigate and figure out what was going on, but we got her referred to an endometriosis surgeon, and now she is living such better quality of life because it was recognized. And she went to countless practitioners before coming to Courtney and me. It's one of those things that is definitely gaslit again. It's like, oh yeah, painful periods, they're normal in a woman's life. And just, take some ibuprofen and get through it. It can be very severe, and it's very disruptive to women's lives. And so I was really appreciating that they were bringing light to that.
Can we just really quick, just for coming down to my level, can we just do a quick definition? So what is endometriosis?
With endometriosis, I really loved one of the physicians, I think it was Dr. Natalie, described it as essentially like Velcro in the abdominal cavity, right? So when we have our menstrual period, our endometrial lining gets flushed out. The lining inside the uterus gets flushed out through the vagina, and that's our menstrual period. Some of it will backflow through the fallopian tubes into the abdominal cavity. And that's natural, that happens. And most people's bodies will recognize that and say, well, look, there's low menstrual blood. Let's break that down and reabsorb it. Other people will have a pretty significant kind of autoimmune reaction to it, like, oh my God, what is that? And then that creates localized inflammation, which then once again creates this huge domino effect and cascade, and can ultimately lead to these lesions that behave in a similar manner to the endometrial lining, but also act as Velcro, creating inflammation and adhesions or scar tissue inside the abdominal cavity. So this tissue is growing with each menstrual cycle, and then also responding to the ebbs and flows of our hormones over the course of the month, creating a lot of pain inside the body. It's essentially like getting these micro periods outside of the uterus that then can't be released, right? And then it just perpetuates and develops. And you get scarring and inflammation. And sometimes, organs in the body get stuck together over time, and that, you can get these large masses, and it can really snowball. For some people, it's super mild. For other people, it can really snowball. Obviously, everybody's experience is different. Both of these conditions, PCOS and endometriosis, are often ones that take years to get a proper diagnosis, especially endometriosis, can significantly impact quality of life in the meantime. and can significantly impact one's ability to conceive later on or whenever they're trying to conceive, and they're part of a stage that has already been set that you're born with of this propensity towards, in the case of PCOS, metabolic conditions, in the case of endometriosis, a propensity towards inflammation. And so while you don't get to choose that, that's how your body's built, right? You can take active steps in addressing that, getting to the root of it, balancing your hormones, optimizing your system, and knowing that in some cases you're having an uphill battle, and to be proactive in that regard so that you can then get to the health goals that you want to get to down the line, whether that's improved quality of life because you're not suffering so much every month, whether that's conception and having a family, or whether it's just improving health span down the line. So you're not dealing with the ravages of chronic inflammation over the course of your entire reproductive years that you're consequently having to address with chronic health issues in your later years. And so both Eartha and Courtney spoke to that to a certain extent, which is you can't just slap a Band-Aid on this and call it good. If some of these long-term goals are your goals, you really need to dive in now and do that deeper work to get things in a more optimal state. And then that pays forward for the rest of your life.
I think part of that is if you've got endometriosis, you're living with severe inflammation all the time. If you're living with PCOS, you're living with a metabolic disease, and both of those affect all the systems in our bodies. And so it's not just a matter of whether or not you can get pregnant, it's the whole system is being affected. And, because it often gets denied as a reason, it a lot of women suffer from it, and I think both conditions have like a genetic component or are a result of how you develop in the womb. Like it's not something that is your fault or because of something that you did. And so there is a connection to making these lifestyle changes, but I think there's a lot of guilt around some of that stuff, and there's a lot of disempowerment around those diseases. And so, yeah, I'm excited that it's becoming part of the conversation, and that the awareness around it is starting to increase. And I'm hoping that it'll lead to better treatment. Like with endometriosis, the only treatment right now is actually surgery and going in and removing those lesions, which is so invasive. And then, like I said, with the PCOS, it's getting on the hormonal birth control, which is not addressing the metabolic portion of things and creating bigger imbalances in the body for when you actually are getting older.
I was just going to comment on that with regard to endometriosis, because for so many women, it takes so long to get a diagnosis. And oftentimes the diagnosis comes from surgery. That a lot of women are told that their endometriosis is suspected but cannot be confirmed unless they undergo surgery. And that prospect just feels really daunting for a lot of women, that they don't know for sure what's going on. And then, if they do, then to your point, Eartha, the option is more surgery. I do feel like, and I don't know the details of it, but I do feel like some research is being done now on using menstrual blood as an indicator and picking up on markers in the menstrual blood for various gynecological conditions. And I look forward to seeing where that goes, because I do see that as a promising avenue to be able to create non-invasive diagnostic techniques and get a better sense of inflammation and other pathologies in the female reproductive system before they get to the point of requiring surgery or impacting one's quality of life for years and years. I think when we look at both PCOS and endometriosis, it goes back to this idea of women expecting to suffer as part of being fertile women, right? Mm-hmm. That the menstrual cycle involves some form of pain and suffering, and to have your pain threshold tested as just part of womanhood, I feel like that assumption needs to be dispelled, because you shouldn't have to suffer, and that shouldn't be expected of you, and you shouldn't have to suffer for years before somebody takes you seriously.
Agreed, totally. And to that point, even in this podcast, the solution that they gave for inflammation for women was cold water submersion, which in traditional Chinese medicine, Eastern medicine is like, oh my God, why are you? No, no, don't be recommending cold into the body when there's pain, because we have such a connection to the idea that cold stagnates. Cold makes things not move properly. And when things don't move properly in the body, we experience pain. And so I just wanted to put out there that there are other options out there that we very much rely on for reducing inflammation in the body, that does not include getting into an ice bath or getting into a cold water bath and freezing your body. And I feel like, Chinese medicine has been aware of both of these conditions for a very long time. They didn't name them PCOS or endometriosis, but we have great treatments for them. Aren't trying to freeze your uterus to get there,
I think in any case, any of these therapies are going to be prescriptive. Like any lifestyle suggestions, recommendations, like nothing is appropriate across the board for anyone. Maybe men can, it doesn't have to be as prescriptive because their constitutions can handle a lot of different extremes. But for women, for endometriosis in Chinese medicine, the diagnosis is often cold in the uterus. So we would not add more cold to the body in that case. And I think that cold therapy is very hot right now, no pun intended, but I think heat, right. But I think heat therapy is just as effective. I mean, there's a lot of talk about sauna therapy and, a lot of different other types of like red light therapy. I think that so obviously with certain heat therapies, we don't want to induce too much sweating. So that's something we have to think about with women also and with trying to conceive. But, in Chinese medicine, we use moxibustion, which is a type of heat therapy, which is going to activate heat shock proteins, which is going to regulate the immune system and lower inflammation. So that's what we have to offer, since we're not huge fans of cold for all of the reasons that Eartha said, and especially if diagnostically we see cold in the body.
It's just so interesting too, because like my instincts feel like as soon as you hear cold, you hear like I feel like contracted. I don't know. It just seems so common sense that like what you were saying earlier, Eartha, like things close, it stagnates, and that like closes your blood vessels instead of opening and releasing and let the flow. And again, I didn't study Chinese medicine, but like to what I've gathered, it seems like you want to keep things flowing and moving and in harmony. And it's just, it's so interesting how these trends just can completely throw our instincts maybe off in that way.
Like I heard one, I can't remember who said this, but they're like, cold equals dead. Like, like life is warm, and keeping heat in the body is important. Of course, if there's too much heat, we're clearing heat, but it's not to the point of where we're icing people down. And also my understanding is that with endometriosis, it's an inflammatory disease. And so your body is put into a like fight or flight mode on a pretty regular basis because your body's fighting inflammation on a very regular basis. And when you add like a cold plunge into that, you're spiking cortisol and you're adding to that, so that there's even more of a nervous system dysregulation. And I think women's bodies are particularly sensitive to that. Men's bodies might get a little bit stimulated by that. And, our bodies are set up differently, and our bodies do respond to stimuli differently. And to just put it out there that cold reduces inflammation in the body it's short-sighted. I think it's not a well-balanced way to think about how to support the whole body, rather than we're going to chill out some inflammation for a little bit, but then cortisol is going to spike. That doesn't help anything either, you know?
And one last thing, this is like a little bit off topic, but it really reminded me of this. So, in that recent meeting I had with that other doula, the language we use in birth is so interesting too. And she actually was brought up the subject of like hypnotherapy, even just the wording around like what we use for a contraction is so interesting because, okay, you're hearing the word contraction, contraction, contraction. And it's like, again, my mind immediately just obviously thinks of like closing up when really that's the opposite of what we want to do. We really want to open. And when you're having a contraction, it's both contracting and opening. It's releasing and contracting. It's so interesting that we've built this whole, again, the kind of programming and the wording around birth is like, it's like, why do we use that word instead of we're actually opening, we're releasing? Because we want to focus on opening things up and letting it flow instead of hearing very restricting wording around it. So I just wanted to, I know it's a little off topic, but it just popped into my mind and I wanted to kind of like tie that in as well. It's just interesting.
No, and I think it totally relates. I think we're often functioning in that world where we're disconnected from what's actually happening, you know? And so, yeah, I've actually heard doulas to call it riding the wave instead of trying to hold tight to get through it.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it's so true. It's very interesting where our language comes from and how it affects how we react to it too. And so much of it comes from a man's world. I bet some physician doctor called it a contraction. I honestly
and
believe.
It just stuck from that on. I wasn't gonna say it, but I'm like, it needs to be said. It obvious, yes, it's so true.
Yeah.
Must have been the situation. And then it's just stayed the course. Yeah.
I think a lot of it comes from understanding what is happening in our bodies, because right then we hear contraction that maybe spikes our nervous system a little bit because we think of clenching, we get scared, we're wondering what's happening, but like having the understanding around it then allows us to relax into it and to know what to do. And I think, right, it's that lack of understanding that in any health situation causes us to be afraid, which causes us to clench up rather than to let things move through, like any kind of pain. I mean, a lot of the work that Dr. Ann does with the mind body health, I feel like touches on that. I mean, what do you think, Dr. Ann?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think what you mentioned there, the big word that I think has come up a few times in our conversation is about fear. And that's a big part of mind body medicine. That's a big part of our lived experience as humans, to be honest with you, is about identifying and managing fears. And the idea of our body giving us signals of, are we safe? Are we not safe? And so if we're using language that then colors our interpretation of our experience in such a way that infers things to be less safe than they are, I think that's important to call out. And obviously we've talked about kind of the sexism that exists in the medical world, especially around terminology and reproductive health, but could apply it to pretty much anything. And being able to call out the power of language and change it if you need to, so that it is a more accurate reflection of your lived experience. I think that's really important. So, yeah, with a contraction, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, my insides are getting squeezed, this is awful, I'm scared, versus changing the terminology of, this is a wave, my baby's surfing out of me right now. Here, let's catch the wave together. And being able to release into that and open up to it and connect through it, that's, different language, different experience, and your nervous system responds very differently. One thing is a threat to safety, and the other is a beautiful, life-changing moment.
Exactly. Amazing. We covered so much today. Is there any like major takeaways that we all kind of have gotten from this?
Yeah, I just encourage everybody to go listen to those 2 podcasts. They were an inspiration to us, obviously. We've had a lot of thoughts about it and conversations about it. We'll put those in the show notes, the links to them. And yeah, I'm excited for that awareness that it brings to a lot of things that are trending, and this season of life that we're going through, moving through perimenopause and fertility and all of that. And so I think it's a good resource for everybody.
Definitely. And just bringing so much light to, again, just topics that are so under researched or are just impacting millions of women that need to be brought to light, and know that there are other resources out there rather than what they've been told is just huge.
Yeah, I think maybe it was Dr. Vonda had mentioned it, that she recommends that women advocate for themselves the way that they would advocate for their daughters, whether you have a daughter or not, that you take your health and your quality of life as seriously and fight for what you want and fight for what you need, to the ends of the earth. And if you're not getting the answers that you need, keep looking. And that can be exhausting, especially if you don't feel well, and especially if you keep getting told that what you're experiencing is normal. If it's not normal for you, if you feel deep down in your gut that something is not right, or you're not living your best life. Like, you don't have to be suffering unnecessarily, but if you're not living your best life, and you deserve to. So find the team that listens, that supports, that gives resources, that empowers, because it's out there. And don't allow yourself to be gaslit into a corner where you're just, your quality of life is diminished and you're suffering for no reason.
I think that eliminating, again, going back to what we were talking about with women feeling guilt around not being able to conceive on their own, or not using what they consider natural interventions, that just to change their perspective on it, we could see it as, in a lot of ways, a liberation, that we are able to choose and that we are able to potentially have it all, to be able to spend time working on our careers and then to plan having our families accordingly. And, there's a big discussion around conceiving later in life, of course, and there's pros and cons, and there's a lot to be considered there. But at the same time, this is another amazing step for women, I think. So we should think of it that way.
Definitely. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing your time this morning and your wisdom and knowledge. And yeah, I just think, again, I know I said this before, but so many people are going to get so much from this. So I appreciate all of you.